Tuesday, 18th of May, 1943. Dearest Kit, I recently witnessed a fierce dogfight between German and English pilots. Unfortunately, a couple of Allied airmen had to jump out of their burning plane. Our milkman, who lives in Halfweg, saw four Canadians sitting along the side of the road, and one of them spoke fluent Dutch. He asked the milkman if he had a light for a cigarette, and then told him the crew had consisted of 6 men. The pilot had been burned to death, and the 5th crew member had hidden himself somewhere. The German security police came to pick up the 4 remaining men, none of whom was injured. After parachuting out of a flaming plane, how can anyone have such presence of mind? Although it's undeniably hot, we have to light a fire every other day to burn our vegetable peelings and rubbish. We can't throw anything into the dustbins because the warehouse employees might see it. One small act of carelessness and we're done for. All university students are being asked to sign an official statement to the effect that they sympathise with the Germans and approve of the new order. 80% have decided to obey the dictates of their conscience, but the penalty will be severe. Any student refusing to sign will be sent to a German labour camp. What's to become of the youth of our country if they've all got to do hard labour in Germany? Last night the guns were making so much noise that Mother shut the window. I was in Pim's bed. Suddenly, right above our heads, we heard Mrs. Van D leap up as if she'd been bitten by Mushi. This was followed by a loud boom, which sounded as if a firebomb had landed beside my bed. "Lights! Lights!" I screamed. Pim switched on the lamp. I expected the room to burst into flames at any minute. Nothing happened. We all rushed upstairs to see what was going on. Mr. and Mrs. Van D had seen a red glow through the open window, and he thought there was a fire nearby, while she was certain our house was ablaze. Mrs. Van D was already standing beside her bed, with her knees knocking when the boom came. Dussel stayed upstairs to smoke a cigarette, and we crawled back into bed. Less than 15 minutes later, the shooting started again. Mrs. Van D sprang out of bed and went downstairs to Dussel's room to seek the comfort she was unable to find with her spouse. Dussel welcomed her with the words, "Come into my bed, my child." We burst into peals of laughter, and the roar of guns bothered us no more. Our fears had all been swept away. Yours, Anne. Sunday, 13th of June, 1943. Dearest Kitty, the poem Father composed for my birthday is too nice to keep to myself. Since Pim writes his verses only in German, Margot volunteered to translate it into Dutch. See for yourself whether Margot hasn't done herself proud. It begins with the usual summary of the year's events and then continues. As youngest among us, but small no more, your life can be trying, for we have the chore of becoming your teachers a terrible bore. We've got experience, take it from me. We've done all this all before, you see. We know the ropes, we know the game, some time immemorial, always the same. One's own shortcomings are nothing but fluff, and everyone else's are heavier stuff. Fault finding comes easy when this is our plight, but it's hard for your parents, try as they might, to treat you with fairness and kindness as well. Nitpicking's a habit that's hard to dispel. When you're living with old folk, all you can do is put up with their nagging. It's hard, but it's true. The pill may be bitter, but down it must go, for it's meant to keep the peace, you know. The many months here have not been in vain, since wasting time goes against your grain. You read and study nearly all the day, determined to chase the boredom away. The more difficult question, much harder to bear, is what on earth do I have to wear? I've got no more knickers, my clothes are too tight, my vest is a loincloth, I'm really a sight. To put on my shoes I must cut off my toes, oh dear, I'm plagued with so many woes. Margot had trouble getting the part about food to rhyme, so I'm leaving it out, but aside from that, don't you think it's a good poem? For the rest, I've been thoroughly spoiled and have received a number of lovely presents, including a big book on my favourite subjects, Greek and Roman mythology. Nor can I complain about the lack of sweets. Everyone has dipped into their last reserves. As the Benjamin of the Annex, I got more than I deserve. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, 15th of June, 1943. Dearest Kitty, heaps of things have happened, but I often think I'm boring you with my dreary chit-chat, and you just as soon have fewer letters, so I'll keep the news brief. Mr. Voscagil wasn't operated on for his ulcer after all. Once the doctors had him on the operating table and opened him up, they saw he had cancer. It was in such an advanced stage that an operation was pointless, so they stitched him up again, kept him in hospital for 3 weeks, fed him well and sent him back home. But they made an unforgivable error. They told the poor man exactly what was in store for him. He can't work anymore, and he's just sitting at home surrounded by his 8 children, brooding about his approaching death. I feel very sorry for him and hate not being able to go out, otherwise I'd visit him as often as I could and help him take his mind off matters. Now the good man can no longer let us know what is being said and done in the warehouse, which is a disaster for us. Mr. Voscajo was our greatest source of help and support when it came to safety measures. We miss him very much. Next month it's our turn to hand over our radio to the authorities. Mr. Kleiman has a small set hidden in his home that he's giving us to replace our beautiful Philips. It's a pity we have to turn in our big one, but when you're in hiding, you can't afford to bring the authorities down on your heads. Of course, we'll put the baby radio upstairs. What's a clandestine radio when there are already clandestine Jews and clandestine money? All over the country, people are trying to get hold of an old radio that they can hand over instead of their morale booster. It's true. As the reports from outside grow worse and worse, the radio, with its wondrous voice, helps us not to lose heart and to keep telling ourselves, cheer up, keep your spirits high, things are bound to get better. Yours, Anne. Sunday, 11th of July, 1943. Dear Kitty, to get back to the subject of child rearing for the umpteenth time, let me tell you that I'm doing my best to be helpful, friendly and kind, and to do all that I can to keep the rain of rebukes down to a light drizzle. It's not easy trying to behave like a model child with people you can't stand, especially when you don't mean a word of it, but I can see that a little hypocrisy gets me a lot further than my old method of saying exactly what I think, even though no one ever asks my opinion or cares one way or another. Of course, I often forget my role and find it impossible to curb my anger when they're unfair, so that they spend the next month saying I'm the cheekiest girl in the world. Don't you think I'm to be pitied sometimes? It's a good thing I'm not a moaner, because then I might become sour and bad-tempered. I can usually see the humorous side of their scoldings, but it's easier when somebody else is being called over the coals. Further, I've decided, after a great deal of thought, to drop the shorthand. First, so that I have more time for other subjects, and second, because of my eyes. That's a sad story. I've become very short-sighted and should have had glasses ages ago. Ugh, what, I look like a Muggins. But as you know, people in hiding can't. Yesterday, all anyone here could talk about was Anne's eyes, because Mother suggested I go to the specialist with Miss Kleiman. Just hearing this made my knees weak, since it's no small matter. Going outside? Just think of it. Walking down the street. I can't imagine it. I was petrified at first, then glad. But it's not as simple as all that. The various authorities who had to approve such a step were unable to reach a quick decision. The first had to carefully weigh all the difficulties and risks, though Miep was ready to set off immediately with me in tow. In the meantime, I'd taken my grey coat from the wardrobe, but it was so small it looked as if it might have belonged to my little sister. We lowered the hem, but I still couldn't button it. I'm really curious to see what they decide, only I don't think they'll ever work out a plan, because the British have landed in Sicily, and Father's all set for a quick finish. Bep's been giving Margot and me a lot of office work to do. It makes us both feel important, and it's a big help to her. Anyone can file letters and make entries in a sales book, but we do it with such remarkable accuracy. Miep has so much to carry, she looks like a pack mule. She goes out nearly every day in search of vegetables and then cycles back with her purchases in large shopping bags. She's also the one who brings 5 library books with her every Saturday. We long for Saturdays because that means books. We're like a lot of little children with a present. Ordinary people don't know how much books can mean to someone who's cooped up. Our only diversions are reading, studying, and listening to the wireless. Yours, Anne. Tuesday, 13th of July, 1943. The best little table. Yesterday afternoon, Father gave me permission to ask Mr. Dussel whether he would please be so good as to allow me, see how polite I am, to use the table in our room 2 afternoons a week from 4 to 5:30. I already sit there every day from 2:30 to 4 while Dussel has a nap, but the rest of the time the room and the table are out of bounds to me. It's impossible to study next door in the afternoon because there's so much going on. Besides, Father sometimes likes to sit at the desk during the afternoon, so it seemed like a reasonable request, and I asked Dussel very politely, "What do you think the learned gentleman's reply was?" "No. Just plain no." I was incensed, and wasn't about to let myself be put off like that. I asked him the reason for this no, but this didn't get me anywhere. The gist of his reply was, "I have to study too, you know, and if I can't do that in the afternoons, I won't be able to fit it in at all. I have to finish the task I've set for myself, otherwise there's no point in starting. Besides, you aren't serious about your studies. Mythology? What kind of work is that? Reading and knitting don't count either. I use that table, and I'm not going to give it up." I replied, "Mr. Dussel, I do take my work seriously. I can't study next door in the afternoons, and I would appreciate it if you could reconsider my request." Having said these words, the insulted Anne turned around and pretended the learned doctor wasn't there. I was seething with rage and felt that Dussel had been incredibly rude, which he certainly had been, and that I'd been very polite. That evening, when I managed to get hold of Pym, I told him what had happened and we discussed what my next step should be, because I had no intention of giving up and preferred to deal with the matter myself. Pym gave me a rough idea of how to approach Dussel, but cautioned me to wait until the next day, since I was in such a flap. I ignored this last piece of advice and waited for Dussel after I'd done the washing up. Pym was sitting next door, and that had a calming effect. I began. Mr. Dussel, you seem to believe further discussion of the matter is pointless, but I beg you to reconsider. Dussel gave me his most charming smile and said, I'm always prepared to discuss the matter, even though it's already been settled. I went on talking, despite Dussel's repeated interruptions. When you first came here, I said, we agreed that the room was to be shared by the two of us. If we were to divide it fairly, you'd have the entire morning and I'd have the entire afternoon. I'm not asking for that much, but 2 afternoons a week does seem reasonable to me. Dussel leapt out of his chair as if he sat on a pin. You have no business talking about your rights to the room. Where am I supposed to go? Maybe I should ask Mr. Van Daan to build me a cubbyhole in the attic. You're not the only one who can't find a quiet place to work. You're always looking for a fight. If your sister Margot, who has more right to workspace than you do, had come to me with the same request, I'd never even thought of refusing. But you... And once again he brought up the business about the mythology and the knitting, and once again Anne was insulted. However, I showed no sign of it and let Dussel finish. But no, it's impossible to talk to you. You're shamefully self-centred. No one else matters as long as you get your way. I've never seen such a child, but after all is said and done, I'll be obliged to let you have your way, since I don't want people later on saying that Anne Frank failed her exams because Mr. Dussel refused to relinquish his table. He went on until there was such a deluge of words I could hardly keep up. For one fleeting moment I thought, him and his lies. I'll smack his ugly mug so hard he'll go bouncing off the wall. But the next moment I thought, calm down, he's not worth getting so upset about. At long last Mr. Dussel's fury was spent, and he left the room with an expression of triumph mixed with wrath, his coat pockets bulging with food. I went running over to father and recounted the entire story, or at least the parts he hadn't been able to follow himself. Pym decided to talk to Dussel that very same evening, and they spoke for more than half an hour. They first discussed whether Anne should be allowed to use the table, yes or no. Father had said that he and Dussel had dealt with the subject once before, at which time he professed to agree with Dussel because he didn't want to contradict the elder in front of the younger, but that, even then, he hadn't thought that was fair. Dussel felt I had no right to talk as if he was an intruder laying claim to everything in sight, but father protested strongly, since he himself had heard me say nothing of the kind, and so the conversation went back and forth, with father defending my selfishness and my pointless activities, and Dussel grumbling the whole time. Dussel finally had to give in, and I was granted the opportunity to work without interruption 2 afternoons a week. Dussel looked very sullen and didn't speak to me for 2 days, and made sure he occupied the table from 5 to 5:30, all very childish, of course. Anyone who's so petty and pedantic at the age of 54 was born that way and is never going to change. Friday, 16th of July, 1943. Dearest Kitty, there's been another break-in, but this time it's a real one. Peter went down to the warehouse this morning at 7, as usual, and noticed at once that both the warehouse door and the street door were open. He immediately reported this to Pym, who went to the private office, tuned the radio to a German station and locked the door. Then they both went back upstairs. In such cases, our orders are not to wash by ourselves or run any water, to be quiet, to be dressed by 8, and not to go to the lavatory. And as usual, we followed all of these to the letter. We were all glad we'd slept so well and hadn't heard anything. For a while we were indignant because no one from the office came upstairs the entire morning. Mr. Kleiman left us on tenterhooks until 11:30. He told us that the burglars had forced the outside door and the warehouse door with a crowbar, but when they didn't find anything worth stealing, they tried their luck on the next floor. They stole 2 cash boxes containing 40 guilders, blank checkbooks, and worst of all, coupons for £330 of sugar, our entire allotment. It won't be easy to wangle new ones. Mr. Kugler thinks this burglar belongs to the same gang as the one who made an unsuccessful attempt 6 weeks ago to open all 3 doors, the warehouse door and the 2 outside doors. The burglary caused another stir, but the annex seems to thrive on excitement. Naturally, we were glad the cash register and the typewriters had been safely tucked away in our wardrobe. Yours, Anne. P.S. Landing in Sicily, another step closer to the... Monday, 19th July 1943. Dearest Kitty, North Amsterdam was very heavily bombed on Sunday. There was apparently a great deal of destruction. Entire streets are in ruins, and it will take a while for them to dig out all the bodies. So far there have been 200 dead and countless wounded. The hospitals are bursting at the seams. I've been told of children searching forlornly in the smouldering ruins for their dead parents. It still makes me shiver to think of the dull, distant drone that signified the approaching destruction.